through these ones real quick, and then we'll talk about them as a whole, because this is like a little bit war-y stuff. So this is like updates to Ukraine, updates to Russia, Ukraine, updates to Israel, Palestine. So Russia accused of launching drone that hit apartment block in Romania, but Putin demands proof. A drone struck a residential building in Romania, in a city that I can't pronounce, near the Ukraine border, injuring 2 people and triggering a fire after impact, authorities said on Friday. They condemned the strike as irresponsible escalation by Moscow. Russian President Vladimir Putin maintained that there's no evidence that the drone was Russian rather than Ukrainian. Then also, Russian drone hits Chinese ship off of Ukraine before Putin meets Winnie the Pooh. Russian forces attack Ukraine overnight with 524 attack drones, including attacks on a Chinese cargo vessel. And then one more for Israel, which is Netanyahu orders Israeli army to seize 70% of the Gaza Strip, violating the ceasefire deal. Speaking in the West Bank settlement, Israeli PM, who is fighting for political survival before election, says we are squeezing Hamas. Because of course, Netanyahu escalates when he's going to fucking lose. You know what I mean? So I feel like, discuss. You know what I mean?
So 70% of the Gaza Strip is not pressing Hamas, right? That's pressing every single man, woman, and child who lives in Gaza. And
he's trying to empty it out.
I want to address a few anti-Palestine talking points I hear from people.
Okay.
First of all, if you think that the Palestinians voted in Hamas, I want you to think about something. That is something that happened decades ago. How would you feel, especially given that many of the people in chat are not old enough to have voted in that election, if someone said that, hey, an election that happened when you were a child or before you were born is the reason I'm now killing your family and setting your house on fire, you'd probably feel like that's some bullshit. So there's that. That's not a good argument. Another one is that I hear is like, oh, well, the Palestinian governments are really, really horrendous to the LGBTQ people. It's like, okay, so your solution to that is to have them murdered by Israel? That's what you think should happen to the LGBTQ people of Gaza? And further, none of the kids were involved in any of that. All of the kids are innocent of all of that. And you might be like, well, what if they grow up to be terrorists? Yeah, we don't do pre-crime here. That's it.
It feels like that every time, a ceasefire happens, this fucking asshole Netanyahu uses it, to normalize a deeper occupation. That's all he's doing every time a ceasefire happens. He's not holding to the end of his bargain around ceasefire, and no one is holding him accountable. Gaza is already damaged and struggling with clean water, sanitation, health services, and a shrinking civilian space. Let's talk about population also. It's already a disaster happening, and this guy just doesn't care, and nobody is holding him accountable. Where the fuck is UN?
Sorry. We talked about that last month. Canada, France, and so the Canada, France, and was it the UK? It's called the Coalition of the Willing or something, which is part of supporting Ukraine. And Canada, I believe the UK signed onto it. I believe France has signed onto it. I don't think Australia has signed onto it yet, but they've been actively talking about Palestine instead of this Hamas versus the IDF situation. They've shifted the narrative in the way they're approaching the situation into a humanitarian crisis. And I do think that is a far better approach, including in discussion. I agree with Dapper's points about argumentation online. However, when it comes to politics and those argumentations and how you want to argue specific the specifics about what's going on, I think readdressing Palestine as instead of a two groups in power struggle, which it is really not, because it's not quite the way. This is not balanced in a way that makes any real sense in the first place. It's like a non-starter. You're a little bit better off to focus on this being what Monty was getting at, being the size is shrinking. There's literally nothing for Israel to even really get out of this besides the land itself and the genocide, because that seems to be the thing that they're interested in. And the only reason they're really interested in that is most of the people in Israel aren't even really interested in this. This is just something Netanyahu is using to stay in power, right? And so if you shift it into a humanitarian crisis and you start talking about, well, like Dapper said, well, the children didn't do anything, they didn't vote for this, and there's starvation going on, and there's you can even leave out like the war crime part, and instead of calling it a war crime, you just talk about it as if it's a humanitarian crisis, which it is. Like, it being a war crime is non-consequent. Like, that's not independent. And if you focus it that way, you shift the entire conversation into like a far more like, instead of a them versus them situation where, oh, well, everybody's bad, Hamas did bad things and the IDF did bad things. You shift the whole thing into, okay, but we don't do this. This is not like an acceptable thing because of not the war part, but the humanitarian crisis issue.
I just want to answer Mania's question, where's the UN? And the answer is that the only part of the UN that really has any actual power is the Security Council. And the problem with that is that there are permanent members of the Security Council, of which the United States is one of them. And any time that any permanent member of the Security Council votes against a resolution in the Security Council, it is defeated, regardless of whether or not it might have had otherwise like unanimous consent. And so the U.S. consistently votes against anything that does anything to sanction or limit or otherwise punish Israel, no matter what. And Manya, I think you're muted.
And no, she's not. Keep in mind that oh, maybe you are. You were showing, but then you stopped.
I can't hear her.
Yeah, we can't hear you. The other thing too is that keep in mind that that Netanyahu is a war criminal and has been decidedly, and he's supposed to be arrested. And there's just, he's hiding in his own country, or he's only going to countries that are willing to host him because everywhere else is going to arrest him on the spot as soon as he touches soil. Landon, you got something?
And it's also the thing, it is virtually impossible for a sitting government to face a vote of no confidence. And if it happens to become, in order, it is impossible for that vote of no confidence to actually succeed. So unlike other parliamentary systems, once the government gets into power, it stays in power until there's an election. The other thing is that because systems like parliamentary systems is common, that they basically devolve into two camps. That sort of is a standard political process. But there's so many parties. Any major party, let's say Labour or Likud, must take on extremist minority parties in order to gain a majority. And the result is you get in a Knesset extremist parties that do extremist things. And it's very hard to hold it accountable, let alone. Now, I know that Netanyahu is desperately trying to avoid prosecution, and as well, but he's probably one of the top 3 war criminals leaders in the world, sadly, and I don't see anything other than a change of an election in Israel and a change of government, and even then you just get another set of extremes on the opposite side. It's a really tragic situation.
So now that we're talking about that depressing thing, and everybody sort of had a little bit of something to say, because we kind of talk about this every month, and it's an ongoing, expansive conversation, and people have adjusted and sort of changed their approach, and sometimes been more aggressive, and sometimes haven't been aggressive enough, or however you, the viewers, decide to interpret what we're talking about. If you have any questions, please feel free to let us know, or if you want us to discuss anything in particular, please use, if you have anything that